understatement to say how exciting this is for us, because from the 2 introductory classes that the Hacham gave us about 3 to 4 months ago, into the Gaonic Sfaradi approach of our ancestors, we were very, very excited to start this series. And what a place to start, Masekhet Sanhedrin. Faur, we are very, very grateful for you being here. We've shared the source sheets with the Talmudim over the last week or so, and we're really excited to begin. So, B'chavod, the stage is yours.
Thank you. So first of all, it's nice to welcome all of you and to see all of you. The form is a little unusual for me, having grown up in physical classrooms and having studied with my teachers in physical classrooms. It is a bit unusual to be teaching in this type of forum. So we will welcome the opportunity that on the one hand, we're not physically face-to-face, and that creates certain limitations, but on the other hand, there's the opportunity to reach out to a larger audience, and I'm very cognizant of that and appreciative of the fact that there's many people who want to study Gemara and who want to understand Gemara in accordance with the traditions of the Hachamim of the Gemara. So let's just dive right in. The assumption that I'm making is that you've studied the Mishnah. I will repeat the first sentence of the Mishnah, which is going to be the subject of the Gemara, and I will introduce the ideas gradually in accordance with the text. So let me just explain what's going to happen here. My goal here is not to cover tremendous amounts of text. We're not doing a Daf Yomi class or an Amud Yomi. My goal here is to explain fundamental concepts that would enable each and every one of you in the future to study Gemara independently, right? So I just want you to understand the goal. Our goal is not to finish Masekhet Sanhedrin. I mean, it would be great to do so, of course. Our goal is not even to finish the first chapter of Sanhedrin, and again, that would be great to do as well. But rather, the goal here is to give you the tools and the methodology that will enable you to understand, if I come from Brooklyn, New York, what the heck is going on here? Okay, I'm just going to use that, more coarse type of language to express that thought, because I think oftentimes people really don't fully understand what's happening in the Talmudic text. So let's dive right in. Okay, I'm going to read the first sentence of the Mishnah. Again, I understand that you have your Gemariyot, your photocopies. The Mishnah starts with Dineh Mamonot Bishlosha. And by the way, I will, Beli Neder, give an introduction to Masekhet Sanhedrin. I intentionally don't want to do it this class. My goal this class is to dive right into the Gemara. So it's not that there is no importance giving an introduction. What is Masekhet Sanhedrin about? But I really want to give each of you a flavor of what the Gemara is about, which is why I'm skipping the introduction to Masekhet Sanhedrin and going right into the text. So again, I'm reading it, and please follow along. Dine mamonot bishlosha, gezelot v'chavalot bishlosha. Okay, that's the first. And by the way, when we used to read Gemara, this is again perhaps another discussion. We used to have particular ta'amim. We used to have particular melody where we would read the Gemara and then we would recite the Gemara out there. So that's that melody that I just chose. Dine mamonot bishlosha. In Judaism, there's Dine Mamonot, and there's Dine Nefashot. Dine Mamonot are judicial proceedings that pertain to financial matters. Dine Mamonot. Dine Nefashot are judicial proceedings where there is a potential capital crime and potential death penalty. So the Mishnah right now is telling us that Dineh Mamonot Bishlosha, the number of dayanim that you need to have in a judicial proceeding pertaining to Mamonot is 3. The Mishnah continues, Gezelot v'chavalot bishlosha. And the number of people that you need to have in a proceeding involving gezelot, robbery, armed robbery, forced robbery, havalot is injury, some sort of personal injury, and we'll explain these things later. requires 3 judges. Okay, now, if you're reading this Mishnah and you just read this first clause, you immediately become aware of what appears to be sloppy editing. The Mishnah seems to be sloppy. It starts by saying, Dine mamonot bishlosha. So we know that proceedings that involve financial matters require 3 judges. Gezelot v'havalot bishlosha. And proceedings that involve gezelot, robbery, which itself is a financial matter, havalot, which is personal injury, which itself is a financial matter, requires 3 judges. So it's not clear why the Mishnah was phrased in this way. And this is going to be the subject matter of the first sugya, which is to say that the first sugya is going to deal purely with the textual matter, with the textual issue, right? And let's read the first words of the first sugya, which introduces the subject matter, and it is as follows. So please turn the page, go to the Gemara, and it says as follows. Tu gezelot v'havalot lav dine mamonot ninhu. The Gemara, aware of what appears to be sloppy editing, asks the question, Atu, do you mean to say that gezelot v'havalot, proceedings involving robbery, proceedings involving personal injury, are not encompassed within the larger category of dine mamonot, right? Because let me explain to you what this is about. Because in order to understand the question, you need to be aware of the following. When Rabbeinu HaKadosh Bet Midrash and his court edited the Mishnah, they started with a huge mass of information. And they had a very particular goal. The goal was to take this huge mass of information and to organize it thematically, according to subject matter. But there was another goal. And the other goal is that when they organize this huge mass of information thematically, they do so in a condensed manner, meaning to choose as few words as possible. Now, when they went about to achieve this goal, there are many cases in the Mishnah where something could have been expressed clearly and more in a way that would be easier to comprehend, but it would require more words, or use less words and create confusion. And the question is, what would Rabbeinu HaKadosh do in that case? Again, the question, I'm presenting the question again. You have an opportunity to express an idea more clearly, but you would be adding words. Or you can express the idea in a way that's potentially confusing, not as clear, but less words. And the answer, and my father discusses this in chapter 4 of the Golden Doves, which you're all welcome to read. The answer is always use the fewest number of words possible. So in the Mishnah, when you're reading the text of the Mishnah, you must understand that strategy. And when you understand that strategy, now you understand the question of the Gemara, because if you don't understand that strategy, then you look at the Mishnah, you say, Dine mamonot bishlosha. Well, that's kind of a general statement, and it's giving us examples of dine mamonot. And why is that even an issue for discussion? That's just that's the way authors write about different topics. So the Gemara is very particular, and it's not going to accept that particular approach, right? Because it's an approach that would assume that the Rabbeinu HaKadosh is going to use a lot of words here or additional words, and we don't allow for that particular understanding of the Mishnah. The text of the Mishnah will always prefer to use the smallest amount of words possible. Okay, that's the idea. Now, I will explain in a future class perhaps why that was a strategy, but for now, just accept that was a strategy. Okay, so now let's read the question again. Tu gezelot v'chabalot lav dine mamonot ninhu. So, am I to understand from the fact that there are two things in the Mishnah? There is dine mamonot, and there is gezelot v'chabalot. Am I to understand that these two things are exclusive? So if I had like if I had a Venn diagram, one circle would have the words dine mamonot in it. The other circle would have the words gezelot v'chabalot. Am I to understand that this is conceptually how these two phrases are to be understood as somehow exclusive from each other, right? So that's going to be the subject matter of the sugya. This first sugya will deal with that question. Now that you understand what the subject matter of the sugya is going to be, I'm going to tell you the structure of the sugya. This is called the sugya meshuleshet. Sugya meshuleshet means that this sugya has three main parts. Now, the purpose of the sugya, of the structure of the sugya, is to act as a sort of roadmap. So when you study the sugya, you always understand where you are and where you're going to, right? So I'm going to give you now the structure. I'm going to give you kind of the map of the sugya, right? No content, right? Just very, very basic structure so that you see it. And then we'll dive into the sugya itself, okay? So there's three parts of the sugya. The first part of the sugya will address the question that was raised, how this question was addressed in the yeshiva of Rabbi Abhu in Caesarea. Rabbi Abhu was the Rosh Yeshiva in Caesarea in the days of the Roman occupation of Israel, and he took a particular approach to the question raised. That's part one. Part one of the sugya itself has three subparts, right? Each one of the subparts will look at the what Rabbi Abhu did with this problem, how he dealt with it in his yeshiva, and from a slightly different perspective, right? The three subparts will complement each other. They're complementary, all right? So that's, the first major part is how did Rabbi Abhu study this problem, how he studied the interpretation of the Mishnah in his yeshiva in Caesarea. Part two of the sugya will offer the explanation of Rava in Yeshivat Fom Bedita. Yeshivat Fom Bedita was in Bavel. There was two major yeshivot in Bavel. There was Surah and there was Nehar De'ah. Then Nehar De'ah was destroyed, and in its place came Yeshivat Fom Bedita. So we're going to be looking at how Yeshivat Fom Bedita approached the question as to the text of the Mishnah differently than how it was approached in Caesarea. So those are the first two parts. The second part also has three subparts. So we'll see that. And finally, the third part of the sugya, Helek Gimel, is going to deal with the halakha. Okay, so now, you explained the Mishnah to me. You gave us different approaches, two different approaches to understand the Mishnah. Give us Pesak halakha. Halakha lema'aseh. How do we deal with this matter? What was the practice in the Jewish courts? And that's going to be the third part of the sugya. So you all see very clearly the sugya. It's all very clear. Again, you start out with the textual problem. Why does the Mishnah say implying that these are exclusive ideas, where in fact, intuitively, we understand that gezelot habalot is actually a subcategory of dine mamonot, and it's not different than dine mamonot. That's the problem. We're going to see the answer of Rabbi Abhu, how he studied it in his yeshiva. We're going to see the answer of Rabbi several generations later, how he studied it in his yeshiva. And then finally, we're going to have a Pesak halakha dealing with halakha lema'aseh. What do we do halakha lema'aseh? Meaning separate from the textual problem. Of course, the Gemara also wants to interpret the Mishnah, wants to explain the Mishnah, but also wants to give us halakha lema'aseh, how to make Pesak halakha. Okay? So up to this point, I'm now going to do something that I usually don't do in Gemara classes. I'm going to look at the chat and see if there's anything here. Right, thank you. גם מסינו בפסחים, לעולם ישנה עליו לתלמידיו דרך kesara. Okay, and in a future occasion, I will explain a little more about why that was the strategy that Rabbeinu HaKadosh employed. But now you have a very clear, that the question makes a lot of sense. Now that you understand the strategy, the question makes sense, okay? So now I want to go into Helek Aleph. Helek Aleph is part 1. And by the way, at the end of the series of classes on Sugya number 1, I will give you some material which summarizes everything. Okay, but I don't want to give you that material right now. I just kind of want to, I want to take you through the sugya step by step, and then we'll tie it all together for you. Okay? So we are now entering the yeshiva of Rabbi Abhu in Caesarea, and we're going to see how he dealt with the Mishnah. Now, I have to tell you that Rabbi Abhu, he was a very important figure in Jewish history, in so much as not only was he the Rosh Yeshiva in Caesarea, but actually the reason the yeshiva was in Caesarea, because originally it was in Tiberias. So just to give you a little background, Rabbi Yochanan was the Rosh Yeshiva in Tiberias, and the yeshiva was in Tiberias. But then Rabbi Abhu, who was one of the most prominent Talmidim of Rabbi Yochanan, so let's say 2nd, 3rd generation in Moraim, he moved it to Caesarea, and there was a reason for that. And the reason is that Rabbi Abhu himself was politically connected with Roman authority. So the Roman proconsul, the local Roman government in Israel, was located in Caesarea, and Rabbi Abhu was very active politically, right? And this is important to know, and I'm going to tell you why Rabbi Abhu, or what qualities did he have that enabled him to be active politically and successful. And this ties into the sugya. So I'm giving you this introduction this background about Rabbi Abhu, which is actually important to understanding the sugya. So Rabbi Abhu himself, he had 3 qualities that enabled him to be a very successful politician. Number 1, the Yerushalmi in Masekhet Megillah says, "Hu yada leshon hachamim, leshon chokhmah." He knew how to speak. He knew the rhetoric of the goyim. Right. So oftentimes you hear politicians speaking, and sometimes there are debates, and there's a certain way to present your case, perhaps to be a little understated, not to be overly dramatic, not to overly emphasize, right? So that's leshon chokhmah. He knew the rhetoric of the goyim. Second quality, he was an expert in the language of the goyim. The Gemara in Yerushalmi Yevamot says he knew leshon Yevanit. He knew the local language that the political establishment spoke. He knew their language very well. And finally, the Gemara actually says that Haya Yefeh Toar, he was very handsome. So the Gemara says that Rabbi Abhu was as handsome as Yaakov Avinu. This is in Bava Mesi'ah. The Gemara discusses that. Rabbi Abhu was very handsome. And finally, and actually this is perhaps as important, so I said 3 qualities, actually 4 qualities, he was very wealthy. So he was a very wealthy person, he was very well spoken, he was very handsome, and because of that, he was able to use his political influence and his relationships with the Roman authorities to help the Jewish people in Israel. And he did so very effectively. So this is Rabbi Abhu, and that's why he moved the yeshiva from Tiberias to Caesarea, right? So now you see where you are and what's happening. Okay, so let's look at the content of what Rabbi Abhu says. And here it is. Amar Rabbi Abhu, ma hen katane. There is 3 words. 3 words to explain what the relationship is between the words gezelot v'chavalot and dine mamonot. Mahen katane, and the Gemara elaborates. Mahen dine mamonot, gezelot v'chavalot, aval hodaot v'halvaot la. Okay. The Gemara says, explaining the words of Rabbi Abhu, Mahen dine mamonot. What is meant by the phrase dine mamonot? The Mishnah said dine mamonot b'shlosha. What does dine mamonot mean there? Gezelot v'chavalot. it means gezelot v'havalot. Aval hodaot v'halvaot la, but it doesn't include other types of financial matters. Dinei mamonot includes specifically gezelot v'havalot, but it excludes hodaot v'halvaot. I'll explain what those things mean. So what does that mean? I don't understand. What does it mean, mahen kataneh? Is there some sort of analogous thing that we can think about in the English language? Right? And there is actually. That's why I asked the question. So sometimes in English, you use a general phrase, and then you use the initials IE. What do the initials IE mean? Does anybody wish to give the meaning of IE? Or perhaps I'll put it another way. What's the difference between IE and EG? Okay, IE, of course, in English, the two letters IE, they're both abbreviations of Latin phrases. In the case of IE, it's id est. I don't speak Latin, so I'm not going to pretend like I do. But in English, it means that is, right? So, for example, I may say, if I'm a doctor, and you come to me and you say, I have a cough. So I can tell you, the cough you have is just going to last for a short period of time. And then I quickly clarify myself. I say that is, i.e., 3 to 5 days, right? So this is very common in English. That is. What does EG mean? EG means, for example, right? So what's the difference between that is and for example? So if you said dinei mamonot bishlosha, you could have theoretically said gezelot v'havalot is an example of dinei mamonot. You can say that. It would make the Mishnah a bit, verbose for our taste, but it would be a possible reading of the text, but that would be incorrect. The chidush of Rabbi Avhu is that the words dinei mamonot, which you intuitively would think is a general category, financial matters or proceedings related to financial matters, no, that is gezelot v'havalot. So therefore, if you look at the Mishnah, dinei mamonot bishlosha, gezelot v'havalot bishlosha, the word that is implied in the sentence, right? I know that to us, this may seem a little odd, but for example, when you write a contract, there are many implied terms in the contract. When you speak any language, there's oftentimes implied terms in the language. But I want to give you an example from this week's parasha. So this week's parasha starts with the pasuk ve'ele toledot Yitzchak ben Abraham, Abraham olidit Yitzchak. Right now, if you look at the Rabbeinu Saadia Gaon there, he uses a word sharach toledot Yitzchak ben Abraham. I don't remember the Arabic word for toledot Yitzchak ben Abraham. He adds a word sharach, story, description. Okay, now go back to the book of Parashat Bereshit, and it says ele sefer toledot Adam. When it begins to describe the genealogy or the offsprings of Adam, it says sefer toledot Adam. There it uses the word sefer. Sefer means sipur, and there Rabbeinu Saadia Gaon uses the word sharach, which means in Arabic the sipur. So over there he uses the word sharach, which means the sipur, and I understand that. Every other time in the Torah where it says the word toledot, Rabbeinu Saadia Gaon uses the same word, sharach, meaning the word sefer, sipur, is implied, right? So this is a very common phenomenon in language where certain terms are implied. So what we're learning here in the Mishnah is, and this is the Hidush of Rabbi Avhu, is there is an implied term here. The implied term is that is, i.e., right? So getting back to the example I brought of I'm a doctor. You can have a cough for a short period of time, 3 or 5 days. That would be a legitimate sentence. By that sentence, I meant you're going to have a cough for a short period of time. That is 3 or 5 days. but anybody speaking the language and anybody hearing me understands the word that is. I don't have to say that is. I say you could have a call for a short period of time, 3 or 4 days. The term that is implied, right? So you see how this works in language, right? So Rabbi Abu is telling us, Dine mamonot bishlosha. That is, by Dine mamonot, gezelot v'chavalot bishlosha. I mean gezelot v'chavalot. That's his answer. I know it doesn't sound perfect because you have the extra word shlosha there. Put it on the side for now. The Gemara will deal with it. But this is the thesis of Rabbi Abu. Rabbi Abu teaches us that gezelot v'chavalot is actually the explanation of Dine mamonot. Okay. Now that we understand his thesis, we are now going to, and this is the first part. The first part is going to present, and we already see the thesis of Rabbi Abu in reading the Mishnah, and it's going to look at this thesis from 3 different vantage points. Okay, so let's start with the first thing, and give me a moment just to find myself. Okay, so first we looked at it from the textual perspective. From the textual perspective, we understand now the Mishnah, we understand that there was an implied term. The implied term by its nature is missing. That's subpart, one little I, let's call it. Now let's look at it from a slightly different perspective. Usricha. Okay. From a conceptual perspective, do I need this? Do I need to say Dine mamonot, that is gezelot v'chavalot? What's the concept here? Until now, we've kind of been dealing with text, but we haven't dealt with any context. Everything has been kind of abstract. So what do we mean conceptually? Usricha. Conceptually, this is necessary. Meaning, conceptually, yes, I needed to say Dine mamonot bishlosha, gezelot v'chavalot bishlosha. It was necessary, and we'll see why. The itana Dine mamonot, because if the Mishnah would have just said Dine mamonot, hava amina de afilu hodaot v'halvaot. If the Mishnah would have just said Dine mamonot bishlosha and not say gezelot v'chavalot bishlosha, what conclusion would I reach? I would reach a conclusion conceptually that Dine mamonot is a general category, which includes all Dine mamonot, which would include gezelot v'chavalot, but it would also include hodaot v'halvaot. Let me tell you what hodaot v'halvaot are. So I already explained gezelot v'chavalot, a gezelot, armed robbery, havalot, injury. So Reuven robs Shimon, and now Shimon brings Reuven to court to pay him. Or Reuven can injure Shimon. Shimon was injured, and now, Shimon brings Reuven to court to get paid. Hodaot v'halvaot. Hodaot means that a situation as follows, where there was a confession, or rather admission. I don't like the word confession. There was an admission. So Reuven, in the presence of 2 witnesses, he admits to Shimon, I owe you $100. Doesn't matter for what reason. I owe you $100. That's hoda'ot. Hoda'ah means an admission. Halva'ot means a loan. So there's a loan, and Reuven borrowed $100 from Shimon, and he has to pay him back. So we're saying that hoda'ot v'halva'ot is excluded from Dine mamonot. Conceptually, it's excluded from Dine mamonot. So, itana Dine mamonot hava amina de afilu hodaot v'halvaot. If the Mishnah would have just said Dine mamonot, that's a general term, I would say, well, then it includes hodaot, it includes halvaot as well. That's why the Mishnah has to say Tana gezelot v'chavalot. It has to add the words gezelot v'chavalot. That is gezelot v'chavalot, so that we exclude hodaot v'halvaot. But think about it. If your goal here is to say only gezelot v'chavalot require a tribunal, three judges, hodaot v'halvaot doesn't require a tribunal. So how would you phrase the Mishnah then? What would be the way that you would phrase the Mishnah? What would you do? Well, I think the answer is obvious. We would just say Gezalot v'Havalot b'Shlosha. So the Gemara now asks exactly that question. So why not just say, why doesn't the Mishnah say Gezalot v'Havalot b'Shlosha v'Shalom al Yisrael, right? No. And it didn't bring the introductory phrase Dine Mamonot. Hava Amina hu adin de'afilu hodot v'halvaot. If it would have said only Gezalot v'Havalot, I would say, okay, Gezalot v'Havalot b'Shlosha. It's a prototype. It's an example. It's an example of Dine Mamonot. It's an example of a larger category, right? I wouldn't understand that Gezalot v'Havalot comes to exclude other cases of financial proceedings. I would just understand that it's bringing me Gezalot v'Havalot as an example of financial proceedings where you need a tribunal, and other financial proceedings you need a tribunal. The Haide Katane, and okay. And why would the Mishnah, because the Mishnah oftentimes does this, why would the Mishnah have chosen Gezalot v'Havalot as the prototype for financial proceedings? And I would have thought, if it just said Gezalot v'Havalot, Mishum de'ikar shelosha dichtive, Gezalot v'Havalot ketive, because the idea that you need 3 judges, as it appears in the Torah, and I'm going to explain that soon, appears in the context of Gezalot v'Havalot. So the Mishnah introducing to us the idea that financial proceedings require a tribunal, chooses the example from the Torah where we learned that financial proceedings require a tribunal. So we would have understood that the reason the Mishnah chose Gezalot v'Havalot is in accordance with the example in the Chumash, but it's a prototype. And as a prototype, other financial proceedings as well require 3 judges. That's what I would have thought if it just said Gezalot v'Havalot. And so the idea that we learn 3 judges or a tribunal for financial matters from the Chumash, put that on the side, meaning we're going to examine that later. But one of the goals that I want to explain to you in the context of this class is the relationship between verses in the Chumash and halachot that are somehow learned from these verses. What does that mean? You know, sometimes we have these types of interpretations of verses that seem to be odd and that don't seem to fully comport with the peshat of the pesukim. I'm aware of that problem, and I want to address that problem. But for now, for purposes of going forward in the sugya and letting you know that this particular issue will be dealt with later, understand, Dichtiv, V'nikra Ba'al Habayit El HaElohim. There's a verse that says in Perashat Mishpatim, V'nikra Ba'al Habayit El HaElohim. There's a series of verses there. This is just an allusion to a beraita that will be dealt with later on, a page away. So that's why the Gemara is not going into the beraita. Okay? Getting back to what we're saying, so from here we learn, from the Torah bringing Gezalot v'Havalot, we learn the law of 3 judges, and that's why the Mishnah chose the example of Gezalot v'Havalot. Okay, so v'nikra, so again, Gezalot tichtiv v'nikra ba'al habayit el ha'elohim. So the law that you need 3 judges in the case of Gezalot, we learn from the pesukim surrounding the verse v'nikra ba'al habayit el ha'elohim. It's a series of pesukim. Havalot, the law that for personal injury, you require 3 judges. Why should it matter if you injured somebody bodily or whether you injured him financially? That reasoning seems a bit odd, doesn't it? Okay, but as I said, we're going to study that later. So I'm aware of the difficulties in the rhetoric, but for now, accept it as rhetoric. Put it on the side till we study in the future in a future sugya. Let's go back now to our point. Therefore, Tana ma hen dine mamonot gezelot v'havalot. So that's why the Mishnah creates this tension. It starts with what appears as a general term, dine mamonot. Then it goes to a specific example, gezelot v'havalot. The specific example is certainly encompassed within the general term. Why bring it? So the only possibility in interpreting this dissonance between the general term is to say there's an implied term, that is. And the purpose of the implied term is to teach us this law that you require a tribunal for financial matters. It's not for all financial matters, but rather, hoda'ot v'halva'ot are excluded from the purview of that rule. Okay? And that's the way Rabbi Avu understands the Mishnah. Rabbi Avu understands the Mishnah when he was teaching the Mishnah in his yeshiva, Dinei mamonot b'shlosha, gezelot v'chavarot b'shlosha, but hoda'ot v'halva'ot are not encompassed in this Mishnah. Okay? I want to take a short break now, and I want to see if there's any questions. So I'm just looking at the side now. Okay. Okay, thank you for the Latin id est versus exemplum. Thank you. Are there any questions? Does anybody want to ask a question? Yeah, I mean, I can continue. But if there's anybody in back of you, Sina, who wants to ask a question.
Yes, please. One question here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just a quick question about was there not, I mean, presumably not, but why wasn't there a Masorah of how the true interpretation of or the original interpretation as intended by Rabbi was supposed to be understood? Why did the Amoraim have to kind of come to this text blind and work out what he's encoded?
Address the question. And when Rabbeinu Kadosh edited the Mishnah, the goal was to organize the Torah Shebe'al Peh, as I said, in a thematic fashion and in a dense fashion, linguistically dense fashion, so that there was a set text which would constitute the authoritative redaction of the Torah Shebe'al Peh. This project was separate from what the Gemara did. It was the function of the Gemara to interpret the Mishnah. That's exactly why we have the Gemara. Okay, now I'm getting onto the more successful. All right, so give me a moment to switch. It finally showed up.
No problem.
Okay. I believe that now there should be no problem in hearing me or in seeing me. Sina,
We can see you now. We can hear you now.
Okay, good. All right. So this is one I'm using next week. So that's exactly the function of the Gemara. The purpose of the Gemara is to create a Masorah as to how to interpret the Mishnah. That's exactly what we're doing. That was a separate project. The first project was organize the Torah Shebe'al Peh thematically, densely, create this linguistic formulation, which is the authoritative formulation of the Torah Shebe'al Peh. Comes the Gemara, good. Now let's create the Masorah. Use the word Masorah or Masoret. I'm not sure what you used. Let's now give the interpretation to the Mishnah. That's a separate project. That's exactly what the Gemara is. You just defined it. Okay, let's continue now in our discussion of Rabbi Avu. Okay. Going back to the Gemara. All right. Okay, and this is the, just one moment, I'm just looking for the place. All right. Okay. So now that we understand how Rabbi Avu explains the text of the Mishnah, we're going to be looking at ulmai. Ulmai means, what is the reason, the legal reason to distinguish between gezalot v'chavalot on the one hand and hoda'ot v'halva'ot on the other hand. So ulmai, if you can find that in the Gemara, which is what I'm doing now. Okay. Ulmai ilema de la ba'enan shelosha. Perhaps the distinction, the legal distinction, because until, we dealt with the text, we dealt with the concept, now we're dealing with what is meant by excluding hoda'ot v'hadva'ot from dinei mamonot? What precisely is the legal consequence of that exclusion? Ulmai. Does the Mishnah mean to say that in the case of gezerot v'chavalot, you require a tribunal, as opposed to hoda'ot v'halva'ot, where you do not require a tribunal? That conclusion is impossible for the following reason. Rabbi Abhu himself said that you cannot have a proceeding dealing with financial matters if you have only 2 judges. You must have a minimum of 3 judges. So therefore, it's clear that when the Rabbi Abhu says dinei mamonot, hoda'ot v'halva'ot is excluded from the purview of dinei mamonot, he doesn't mean to say that hoda'ot v'halva'ot do not require 3 judges. That would be an absurdity. Of course, it requires 3 judges. He himself said so. So what is meant by excluding hoda'ot v'halva'ot from the purview of dinei mamonot? Ela dela ba'enan mumchim. And the answer is that generally, when you have a tribunal, you need to have expert judges. And what Rabbi Abhu is telling us that whereas in gezerot v'chavalot, you need to have expert judges, in hoda'ot v'halva'ot, excluded from the Mishnah, you don't need to have expert judges. There'll be 3 judges, but they don't need to be experts. And we're going to explain soon what the reason is that Rabbi Abhu makes this distinction between hoda'ot v'halva'ot, where you don't need expert judges, and gezerot v'chavalot, where you do require expert judges. But first, before looking at the legal theory, we're going to look at the textual basis. And now I want to take the next few minutes to explain to you about Talmudic rhetoric. Okay. Oftentimes, in the Midrash Halakha, we try to relate particular laws to verses, and we try to find a relationship between nuances in the verses and the laws that we are studying. So I'll give you an example. The pasuk says, "Et Adonai Elohecha tira." You should have fear of God. Yirat Shamayim. So that's one of the mitzvot. The Chachamim note that the word "et" appears to be redundant. Why do we need the word "et"? So they say "et lerabot tamidei Chachamim." The word "et" comes to include within the law of yirah from God, to also have yirah of tamidei Chachamim. Et. Let me ask a question. Is there actually a logical relationship between the word "et" and the idea that Talmidei Chachamim should be feared? No, there isn't. Let me give you another example. The pasuk says, "Kabed et avicha ve'et imecha." They say, what does that have to say? Kabed et avicha ve'et imecha. Should it say kabed et avicha ve'imecha? Why the extra et, the second et? It says et lirabot achicha hagadol. Et lirabot achotecha hagedola. The word et comes to include within the law of kibud av va'em that one must also respect one's older brother, or one must also respect one's older sister. So let me ask the question again. Is there actually a relationship between the law of respecting one's brother, older sister, and the word et? No, there isn't. Most of the derashot that you would look at, they don't present, thank you, they don't present a compelling or necessary interpretation. All they present is a possible interpretation. Thank you. Thanks. I just received my espresso, without which I cannot continue teaching. Thank you. Okay. In my opinion, one should not answer amen on the Zoom call because I don't know if there's a slight delay, and I consider it to be amen yotoma, which is why I just said the beracha to myself and not out loud. Put that on the side for now. Okay, continuing. So, what is the purpose of these derashot? And the Sifra, which is a Midrash Halacha and Vayikra, is filled with derashot of this nature. The Sifra is filled with derashot of this nature. Sifra is the Midrash Halacha on Devarim. The Mechilta is filled with derashot like this. We just touched upon a potential derasha, which I didn't explain it to you yet, but that in the context of Gezelot, the word Elohim, which means judges, is repeated 3 times for 3 different verses. And from here we learn that you need to have 3 judges. Is that compelling? I mean, can somebody come and say this really is an actual proof that you need 3 judges? Because the word Elohim is repeated the word Elohim is repeated 3 times because we needed to say the word Elohim 3 times because each verse had its own particular syntax. So what is the meaning of these derashot? That's an important question. Without this, you really can't understand the Gemara. You can't understand what's happening. And let me elaborate upon this. The Chachamim, they were strong believers in rhetoric, which is to say that there is the idea that you want to transmit, and there is the linguistic tool that you use to transmit the idea. Both are important. It's important that the idea you transmit is a valid, correct idea, but it's also important that when the idea is transmitted, it's done in a linguistically intelligent and eloquent fashion. What happens in the Midrashei Halacha is the Chachamim, for example, they have a tradition. It's not always like that. Sometimes they institute laws themselves. But let's take a law that comes from Moshe Rabbeinu. Etrog. We know that the Arba'a Minim, one of the minim is the etrog. The Torah doesn't say etrog. How do we know it's etrog? Because we have tradition. Torah shebe'al peh. Now the Gemara, it says peri ayes hadar. So it says peri ayes hadar hadar. The word hadar actually means a beautiful fruit, right? Hod ve'hadar pa'olah. Beautiful are the actions of God. When it says peri ayes hadar, it means a beautiful fruit. What is that fruit? Well, from the pasuk I don't know, but of course I do because I have tradition from Moshe Rabbeinu, and I know that peri ayes hadar is referring to etrog. But come the Chachamim, and they try to express the idea of etrog rhetorically. But the rhetoric of the Chachamim is always based on the Pesukim in the Torah. So let me illustrate that in the context of etrog. Peri ayes hadar means beautiful fruit, but the Chachamim say peri hadar ba'es mishana l'shana. Hadar also means to live. Ha, that, dar, lives. So what fruit lives on the tree from year to year? And the answer is the etrog, because it stays on the tree from one season to the next season. What was the purpose of that? The purpose of that was not to prove that the peri ayes hadar is an etrog. We already know it's an etrog because we learned that from Moshe Rabbeinu. We have Torah shebe'al peh. But the purpose of that is to express this lesson that we learned from Moshe Rabbeinu through the Pesukim in the Torah. So the Pesukim in the Torah become the rhetoric of the Jewish people, right? And when we read peri ayes hadar, because it becomes part of our rhetoric, we understand peri ayes hadar. Oh yes, the fruit that lives on the tree from year to year, and of course we associate it with etrog naturally, right? This is important, not just for the laws of Moshe Rabbeinu, where Chachamim oftentimes they have a law that we receive from Moshe Rabbeinu, they try to connect it with the Pesukim rhetorically. But it's also for laws that the Chachamim themselves instituted. They often try rhetorically to connect it with the Pesukim. So you'll see a lot of discussions in the Gemara where you can study it one way. The Gemara is now proving this law from the Pesukim in the Torah. These so-called proofs are really, as I said, they're not compelling, and if anything, they seem, a bit odd. I mean, how is that a proof? But the answer is, it's about rhetoric. The substance is there. The Chachamim have the right to institute laws. The Hachamim have a right to make gezerot, to make takanot. And then as part of developing the gezerot and the takanot, or some of the gezerot and the takanot, they connect it rhetorically to the pasuk by reading the pasuk in a certain way. So when you have a derasha, it's giving you a possible reading of the text, which becomes the midrash halakha, the formal midrash halakha of the text, right? But that midrash halakha doesn't displace the peshat. The peshat is always there, right? But rather the midrash halakha is meant to connect those laws that we either got from Moshe Rabbeinu or that us as the Bet Gadol of the Jewish people instituted to the pesukim in the Torah. I learned this from Harambam in the Hakdamat Perush HaMishnayot. Harambam discusses a lot of this. So just so you know, it's not like, a personal theory that I somehow developed, but rather this is part of the traditions of learning the Gemara of the Hachamim from Andalusia and the Geonim, and Harambam expressed this tradition in his Hakdamat Perush HaMishnayot. So just so you know what the source for that is. Okay. Now, having said that, we are now going to embark upon one such rhetorical exploration. Okay. Now, for purposes of this rhetorical exploration, I'm going to do two things. Obviously, the next class, we're not going to get to it. I'm going to bring to you the Pesukim and the Torah. I'll share them on the, do a screen share. I'm going to show you what the Pesukim say, because there's no other way to understand the rhetoric. You can't understand the rhetoric, and this is a mistake that's made when studying Gemara. The Gemara brings derashot. If you don't look at the pasuk, you just don't understand what the rhetoric is. You can't understand what the Gemara is talking about. So even though the rhetoric is not the peshat, the rhetoric is important, right? Because it goes to how the Hachamim thought and how the Hachamim expressed ideas, right? So I'm going to, in the next class, I'll bring to you the pesukim in the Torah from where we learn the idea of three judges. And when I say we learn, I mean we rhetorically express through these pesukim the ideas of three judges. And then in the context of these pesukim, we will be challenged to ask the following question. Should hoda'ot v'halva'ot be included or excluded from those pesukim? And that would be, again, a rhetorical question that the Gemara will deal with. So I think the time has come. I apologize for the technical difficulties. It's beyond my control. But I do hope that in the next class, we have, better technical facilities.
Thank you so much, Acham. Really, really.
If there's any last questions, it's early by me. I know you guys are probably, it's a little later there. But if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to take those questions. And
yes, we'll do one in the physical room and then one virtual room. We'll start with the physical room.
Yes.
The ideas that Chacham spoke about with Drashot is very logical and something that I've thought about for a long time. But the Gemara seems to make differentiations often where something's an asmachta ba'alma and where it's actual drasha that it makes. Is there two levels to what the Chacham is saying over here?
Yes, that's correct. Correct. Sometimes, and perhaps we will discuss that as well, because I gave a kind of a general, explanation. There's a lot of details that need to be filled in, but sometimes a pasuk is used as an indexing system for laws. That's all. So they would index the law, so imagine you have a filing cabinet. I know now we all have computers, but back in the day, centuries ago, when I was growing up, they had filing cabinets and they would index things according to letters, right? A, B, C, D, and, in the filing and the folder for A, you would have things related to A and B and C. Oftentimes, the pesukim themselves would be used for filing certain laws because that helps us remember the laws. So every time we read the pasuk, we remember this law and that law and that law, right? So that oftentimes happens. Asmachta be'alma refers to that, where it's not a question of expressing something eloquently, but rather just filing away the law. Now, when we look at that pasuk, we remember, yes, I remember that law. Correct. That's asmachta be'alma. Okay. What else? You said somebody from the...
Yeah, I think, Ohad, do you want to unmute and ask a question?
Sure. Thank you, Chacham. If I recall, the Chacham mentioned that Rav Avau's political position affected the sugya. So did the Rav explain that?
First of all, thank you. You're correct. And no, I didn't explain that yet. That will be explained further down. the relationship between Rabbi Abhu being a politically in tune, a man of commerce, a man of politics, will show us what exactly, well, I don't want to say motivated him, but was a consideration in his particular approach. We will see that further down in the sugya.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll check the chat if that's okay, Acham, quickly for.
Please go ahead, go.
Yeah,
it's the end of my workday, so I can speak if you have more questions.
No questions in the chat. Anybody in the virtual room if you want to speak, if they can just put their virtual hand up, there's a little button there, or please unmute. Nope. No questions. Okay.
All right.
Nobody? No.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Hacham. Chazak u'Baruch, and we look forward to next Monday. Any particular preparation for next Monday?
Review the sugya and go forward so that you understand the basic concepts, so that when I teach it, you already are familiar with the dialogue, and then you'll be able to compare what you learn from your various resources to how I explain the sugya.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here. Look forward to seeing you on Wednesday for Rabbi Dweck's continuation of the Hakdamat Mesilat Yesharim, the dialogue version. And then I believe, Avi, you said Thursday. If you want to quickly mention that.
On Thursday, we have there's the Nachala of Isaac Orobio de Castro, and we have the translator Walter Hilliger, who's translated one of his works. We'll be doing because it's his Nachala of Isaac Orobio de Castro. We will be doing a sort of an informal meetup, and everyone is welcome. It will be open to all, and we'll be going through some of the book. And we hope to see you all. We'll send out details and a flyer so with more information. Chazak Baruch, everybody. See you Wednesday.
Thank you, Acham. Bye-bye, everyone.